Welcome to our overview of Season 1, Episode 2 of House of David, entitled Deep Calls to Deep. Right off the bat, let's look at the title of the episode. It's a quote from Psalm 42:7 that says, "Deep calls to deep in the roar of your waterfalls. All your waves and breakers have swept over me." This is the episode where we learn about David's mother, with the storyline that's depicted throughout House of David. The episode opens at sunrise, with young David and his mother Nitzevet going to observe an astronomical event that will not happen for another 28 years, when the alignment of the sun and the moon and the stars are just as they were at the dawn of creation. They then recite the Birkat HaChama, or rather, they sing it. The blessings text translate to, "Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who effects the work of creation." According to tradition, the sun would return to its original position in the sky at the moment of creation on a Tuesday evening, which is why the blessing would be recited on the following Wednesday morning. The event involves the sun's position relative to the vernal equinox, occurring on the morning after the Tekufat Nisan, or start of spring. So why does it take place every 28 years, you may ask? It's based on the fact that a solar year is about, as we know, 365 and a quarter days long. It takes 4 years for the equinox to shift by 1 day, and 7 days for the week. That would be 4 times 7, or 28 years. While they take part in this sacred observance, they're given a hard time by someone who says, "You don't belong here." Remember, it's because there were dubious beginnings to David's life. In the show, David is treated as a bastard, and Jesse's marriage to Nitzevet not completely lawful. This stranger says, "You defile the name of Jesse and all of Bethlehem." Nitzevet, defending her son, goes to the man and says, "You may know that I am a seer." Not exactly like Samuel, but she does have visions. And she lets the fellow know that she has seen that people will remember her son's name long after that other fellow's is forgotten. And as we know, that comes to pass. Because of the reaction David receives, he asks his mom if he's a curse. And sweetly she replies, "No, you are fearfully and wonderfully made." If that phrase rings a bell, it's because it can be found in the 139th Psalm. The term there, fearfully, that word, does not mean anything about being scared. It refers to more of a sense of awe or reverence or even honor. It speaks to the profound and unique nature of creation and how each person basically is a masterpiece. There are little Easter eggs like this throughout the entire series. They're fantastic. This next little scene, when they're on the way home, is when we get to the title of the episode, Deep Calls to Deep. Nitzevet tells David to close his eyes, clear his mind, and listen. But not just listen with his ears, listen with his soul, because that's where God will reach him. Unfortunately, like most of us, David hears nothing. And she assures him, "You will. It just takes some practice." The scene shifts to life at home. Little David with his young brothers, who are out playing with fake swords. David goes out and says, "Brothers, can I play with you?" They drop their swords and run away. No one wants anything to do with David. Frustrated, David goes marching out of the area. He's told, "Do not go beyond the gate." I know, the defiant little boy says, and immediately walks right through the gate, beyond the wall where he's told not to go, disobeying. He is frustrated. Why is he such an outcast? Why does no one want anything to do with him? So he gives it a go at the deep calling to deep thing. He closes his eyes and he listens. He listens for God's voice to show him who he is. Unfortunately, all he hears is the rumblings and growling of a magnificent lion known as the King. Stealthily, as the lion approaches, David picks up a rock, intending, we believe, to hurl it at the lion. Nitzevet, who, as we know, told him not to go beyond the wall, approaches and tells David to be very still, that the lion will sense his fear. She tells him to calm his breath, and she reminds David of how much she loves him. With that, She runs screaming to get the lion's attention, to divert it away from David, and sacrifices herself, being mauled by the lion so David can escape. Jesse, and this is years before we first meet him when he's able to walk freely without the use of a staff, races out to see what's happened, hearing the screams and the lion's roars and David shouting. It's interesting that instead of asking what happened, he says, "David, what have you done?" Immediately assuming David did something wrong. Makes you wonder what kind of precedent there is for him to go to that conclusion. Sadly, Nitsevet does not make it. And on her deathbed, when she asks to speak to David, she lets him know that God has shown her what will become of him. And she fears that his life will be so very hard. Remember, she does see visions. She does hear God's voice. And now God calls to her. Is this that deep calling to deep? David says, "What is it that God's shown you I will become?" But she isn't able to last long enough to tell him, or chooses not to. His father pulls him from the room, and Jesse has a last moment with his wife. After her death, Jesse sends David out to mind the flocks. The grief is too much. Seeing David reminds Jesse of Nitsevet and what he's lost with her. Remember that in the show's telling of the story, David is the only son of Nitsevet. Very different than the biblical version. So David is sent out of the house to live away from the rest of the family in the hills with the sheep at a young age where there's still a lion on the loose. Definitely not something you could envision parents today doing with their young children. Without even a cell phone, can you imagine? As the little boy David walks through the fields away to go tend the sheep, it dissolves into current David, hobbling back after his encounter with the lion. That same lion. It's here that we really see the significance of the Lion of Judah. That's what Judah was known as. Whereas King Saul's tribe was Benjamin the wolf, Judah is the lion. And David has defeated the lion that in the TV show killed his mother. That is a profound step for him. One that will definitely prepare him to face Goliath. As with most parents who are dealing with a child being missing, a disobedient child, after he finds out David's okay, Jesse immediately disciplines him for being disobedient. We don't know if Jesse believes David or not that he killed the lion, but we know Ava does, because David gives her 2 of the claws from the lion and says, "He won't scare you anymore." David has already faced fears, conquered them, and made life better and safer for those he cares about, which is what he will do when he becomes king, and earlier than that, when he joins the house of Saul and looks after those he loves in his adopted family. Back in Gibeah, at the fortress, Saul has been in bed, unconscious on and off for many days, and he finally wakes up to the relief of Michal and says, "I haven't felt better in a long time." When she goes to announce to whoever is there, which happens to be Jonathan and Abner, that her dad's awake and that he seems more like himself, she breaks down in tears in front of Jonathan at the thought of her father's screams. She said it was like he was being burnt alive. We cut to Saul's bedchamber where Abner, his cousin, and his wife Ahinoam have gathered to speak to him, and he brings up the fact that Samuel intends to anoint someone else to be king. Ahinoam scoffs, and she's like, "You've been in a fever. You've been delirious." And he says, No, this is for real. Samuel said this to me before I fell into darkness. Well, Ahinoam doesn't think it's that big of a deal, or at least makes it sound that way in dealing with Saul. She says that people love you, they revere you. Abner brings up the fact that Samuel is revered as well, and that his power is not of this world. So when Saul says, "Follow him," what are you going to do to the man of God if a regular blade can't harm him? Saul asks that Abner get the person who's to be anointed, find him, bring him back. But Ahinoam takes it a step further and says, "You can't just find this person or bring him back. You need to slay him and everyone in his house." Something Abner is not thrilled to do, But Ahinoam says that it must be done to ensure the Philistines do not view the house of Saul as being weak in any way. And when Abner says he will see it done, Ahinoam decides to make sure by asking him who he serves, which is, of course, the house of Saul, not God. At least that's his answer. Going to the city of Gath, we meet King Achish, who's a very interesting character. He's not a mustache-twirling villain. He is one of the Philistine kings. Apparently there are 5 of them. Why you need 5 kings in one area is beyond me, but this is what they had. So he assembles the kings of Philistia with a very smart plan to band together to fight the Hebrews. He reports that they have defeated the Amalekites. The other kings don't really believe him. They mock Saul as being the king of the donkeys. And if you watched our video about Saul and his family, you got Saul's origin story, which involved donkeys being lost. Achish says, well, they may not have much. He might be a king of donkeys, but even so, fortune has turned in his favor. And the little Hebrew tribe beat Agag with chariots and horses and a vast army. They were no match for the Hebrews with their pitchforks. Another of the kings writes that off as a mere rumor. Despite Achish having a great plan with 5 unified armies to ride against Saul, the other kings aren't interested. One goes so far as to say, your father had much better taste in wine. So they write off King Achish's plan, and they go back to defend their own homes, fortify their own cities, leaving Achish to go to plan B, which is to find new gods. What might that mean? In a pivotal and delightful scene, there's a wedding in Judah. The king's guard, including Yoav and Eliab, David's cousin in the show, Yoav, and in real life, his brother, Eliab, returning from war after the trouncing of the Amalekites. At this wedding, the king's favor is displayed by the presence of the princesses, Mirav and Michal. Mirav, the cynical one, says, yeah, this is just a distraction. Parade the princesses around, and then they won't notice that their king is losing his mind. David is entranced by seeing these royal daughters, who stay for the wedding as honored guests. At one point, a cute male party guest raises a cup to Mirav. They exchange a glance because they're both attracted to each other. And while dancing, Michal notices the fellow playing the lyre, who is singing beautifully. Who could that be other than David? It's here we find out that Yoav carries a torch for Michal. When Michal approaches David to ask about his playing, his music, did he write it? They have a cute little exchange, and he says, maybe I'll write a song for you someday. Pretty prophetic. Remember, according to consensus, he would be about 15 at this point. Yoav tries to shut down their flirtation and gives David an Amalekite blade, which David thinks is great, until he finds out it's from the battlefield, and that it's cursed because the seer, Samuel the prophet, said, keep nothing. So even though David is not from a rich family, he's just a poor shepherd, he chucks this fine blade into the fire, just because the prophet said not to keep anything from the Amalekites. David and Michal share a couple more glances before she leaves, and a romance has been sparked. This is when we learn a little bit more about Yoav, when Eliab is like, why are you provoking Yoab, this hardcore fighter? He's not a man to be crossed. Even though he's our cousin, he would just as quickly slit your throat. And this is when Eliab tells David to play a song that will stir the passions and get Eliab a wife, by which we can infer that he is single. And as far as we can tell, all the sons of Jesse are single when we meet them. This next scene is a great one as far as setting up what will come with David's prowess with a sling. Eliab's giving it a go the next morning after the wedding, where the boys are presumably hungover. We see Eliab unable to use the sling and David acing it. It's during this scene that we find out that Abinadab is the fun one in the TV show. Lighthearted, fun sense of humor, teases David. When David brings up the fact that he killed a lion, Abinadab teases him and says, oh, really? Last time I heard this story, it was about a bear, which, according to the Bible, is true. David at one point defeated a lion and at one point defeated a bear. So we've got all sorts of biblical Easter eggs in here. This is when Nathaniel's opinions about David come out fully. And he says if David loses this wager involving the slingshot, then David will no longer show his face in town to disgrace us. I find it very interesting that David moves right on with his conversation, not even acknowledging what Nathaniel said. Is that because he's heard it so often that it's just par for the course at home? Clearly, he's had to develop a thick skin to not be wounded every time somebody says something unkind to him. When we see David hit 2 jars with 2 rocks with 1 sling motion, we know this guy is seriously capable. But even so, Eliab will not take him to go see the battlefield, which was David's request. No matter how much David begs and pleads, Eliab says, I will not defy our father. He put you in the hills, and that's why you will stay there forever. Realizing there's no reasoning with Eliab, David decides, fine, I'll go there on my own. I'll go see the battlefield. I'll find it. Eliab gives it a think and says, you really want to see blood and gore and death? I'll take you there. Follow me. So they head out to the border village, where in episode 1, Eliab, Joab, Abinadab, and Jonathan found the place sacked, with arrows the size of spears and a handprint on a wall larger than a weaver's basket. That's become a new term of measurement for me, by the way, is larger than a weaver's basket. Saul is now up and around, having been out of it for presumably 11 days, and he spars with his son, roughly, proving that he is still a capable, strong warrior, and that while Jonathan will be ready to be king when the time comes, Saul is still firmly in the throne chair. We then cut to Michal, who is in the sacred chambers where the priests transcribe the word of the Lord, which she loves to do because she loves words. Saul shows a beautiful necklace of rare stones, not gems, just simple stones that he had picked up with Ahinoam when they were young, and he had them set into a necklace. When he asks Michal if Ahinoam will like it, Michal is very touched by how romantic the gesture is by her father. She says, I know mother will cherish it forever. David and Eliab make it to the border village and poke around a bit, where they do see the signs that it looks like giants had been there. Hard to believe as it may be. After roaming around a bit, they find that they are being watched. And David comes face to face with King Achish. This is one of the most interesting exchanges in the series. Both of these fellows are very casual with each other. When Achish is asking David if he's from the tribe of Judah, the tribe of the lion, not wanting to divulge too much, David says, I killed a lion, though my brothers do not believe me. And Achish, who I find as being pretty humble and self-aware, he says, that's impressive. And I know what you mean. My brothers often do not believe me. Greatness is often dismissed by those closest to us. Eliab is stealthily making his way around, and he learns that they are Philistines who are there, and he starts dispatching them. When Achish asks David if he knows about the legend of the Anak, the Anakim, or sons of Anak, meaning the giants, who were created or born when the sons of God descended and had children by the daughters of men, Achish says, do you believe these legends? That's when David says, I believe all the words of Moses, betraying the fact that, yes, he is a Hebrew. When David says, we were delivered by the God of gods in Moses' story, Achish says, there can be no other gods? David, showing his faith, says, we need no other gods. That's when Achish pulls a bow and arrow out and says, can your God save you now? David escapes out the window, and the chase is on. In the most incredible action scene, Eliab takes out Philistine after Philistine as David looks on in shock. Earlier, Eliab had told David, you are a shepherd and a poet. You are not a man of blood, meaning a warrior. Well, David's getting to see firsthand now what it means to be a warrior, what it means to spill blood and rend flesh. Accomplished warrior Eliab takes out more. The Philistines are no match for Eliab as a warrior. And after saving David over and over again, they flee. A little tidbit here, we see David holding his arm as if injured. That's because, if I have this straight, Michael Iskander, who plays David, had worked so hard using his sling that he literally got injured and couldn't use his arm. So I'm guessing they wrote that into the scene? Maybe. When they take off, running down the hills, they do encounter a few more Philistines, who Eliab handily takes out. Unfortunately, though, Achish is a master with a bow and arrow, and Eliab is shot. They try to make it home, but it's slow going. Eliab is not doing well. Meanwhile, back at the palace, Saul is losing his grip. He knocks over a cup of wine, and when his servant Yoshia goes to clean it up, Saul rips his head off. Metaphorically, by the way, not physically. Because Saul wants to do it himself. He doesn't want to feel like he's no longer capable of simple things. And he kind of goes in and out of this state. He apologizes to Yoshia like he's fit mentally now. But Saul has these moments. Saul is such an interesting character and so complex. And the way he's played by Ali Suleiman is just incredible. I can't tell you what a great job he does with catching all the nuances, with making Saul at one moment feel totally likable, like he's a good dad, a just ruler, a kind husband, and then showing his descent into madness at the same time. That unfortunately was brought on by his own pride and quest for glory. In a cute scene between him and his wife Ahinoam, he asks, "Are you happy here, making this fortress into our home?" And she says, "It's a bit drafty." It's very cute. They talk about the days gone by when life was simpler. And as they reminisce, we cut to Jonathan, who's back in his room after the battle, pulling off of his arm. I may have this totally wrong, so please let me know in the comments. But I think that the little leather boxes and strips of leather Jonathan has wrapped around his arm might be a tefillin with small leather boxes that contain verses from the Torah. They were to be bound to the head and the arm with leather straps. And in the show, Jonathan would have worn it to draw spiritual strength, divine guidance, and protection. And they were to be worn on the non-dominant arm. So in Jonathan's case, not his sword arm. The tefillin or tefillin can be seen as creating a shield of holiness or protection for a warrior, specifically protection by God during battle. And as we know, Jonathan was definitely God-fearing. Again, the word fear, not meaning to be afraid of, but to be in awe or reverence of. We plunge further into Saul's descent in the next scene that shows Queen Ahinoam backing out of their bedroom as Saul drags King Agag's sword in one of his mentally unhinged states. And he is mistaking his wife for Samuel and saying, "Samuel, I will slay you," while he, the tall, mighty king, is dragging this huge, jagged sword. It requires both Jonathan and Avner to restrain Saul. And when Saul becomes more lucid after attacking and nearly killing his beloved son Jonathan and even Avner, when Saul comes to himself, he says, "Have things really come to this? Have things really gotten this bad?" He realizes he's in bad shape. They get him back to bed, but understandably, Ahinoam is shaken. Our final scene cuts back to Eliab giving up. He can't make it all the way home. It's too far. He's got nothing but young David to lean on. He's like, "Just leave me here to die." And David says something that by itself may not seem like a big deal, but it will be later. He tells Eliab, "I am stronger than you think." And he repeats it. If something's repeated, you know it's being emphasized. "I am stronger than you think." And he is. And we know that that strength is just not physical. It's his strength of soul, his strength of conviction, his strength of faith in God. And the episode ends showing them making the long slog home with Eliab hanging over David's shoulders. So what are the key themes or major plot points that we discussed today? We had the backstory with Nitzevet, showing the flashback of her death and making the defeat of the lion all the more poignant. We see David's longing to be a warrior, as evidenced by his desire to go to the battlefield. We know that his brothers do not view him as a man of war. We get to know King Achish of Gath. Gath, Gath, may be known to those who read the Bible as the place where Goliath was said to hail from. We see that interesting exchange between David and Achish. Neither one is beating their chest, and they both speak pretty frankly with one another. We see how there is now a conspiracy, as viewed by Saul, of Samuel anointing another, and that Abner is being tasked with finding out who it is, or, as Ahinoam says, killing whoever it is, along with everyone in their family. This is a desperate measure to protect not only her husband, but the throne and her whole family. We see Saul's torment, as referenced in Samuel 16:14, where it says, "Now the Spirit of the Lord had departed from Saul, and an evil spirit from the Lord tormented him." This is a key event that will lead to the eventual introduction of David as a musician to soothe the king's soul. We see young David as a little boy struggling with being an outcast, feeling cursed both by people in the town and by his own brothers. We have Psalm 42:7, deep calls to deep, and we know that Nitzevet had that connection with God. We have the biblical reference to Anachim, the giants, as evidenced previously by the handprint. And we know that that is who King Lachish is looking for when he said he was going to summon new gods after the other 4 kings of Philistia dismissed his plan of banding together. Lachish went to his plan B, and the new gods he would summon would be giants. For those who don't know why David is referred to as a poet, it wasn't just because of him playing the lyre and singing in the episode. It's because he would write many of the Psalms that are in the Bible. And of course, we have the beautiful meeting with a touch of romance between David and Michal. Historically, referring to Gibeah, the fortress was rustic. It was not a splendid palace. So Ahinoam's quip, "It's a bit drafty," is an allusion to the fact that this place is not cozy. Remember, these were early days in the monarchy because Saul was literally the first king of Israel. And this was a time of transition from tribal judges to a monarchy with a centralized administrative structure. Achish, in the presence of 4 other kings of Philistia, remind us that the Philistine threat is always right there. The Philistines, believed to be one of the sea peoples who settled the coast, with 5 primary cities, form the Pentapolis: Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod, Gath, and Ekron. And we know that they were militarily superior to the pitchfork-toting Israelites. And we've already established that despite their modern, superior weaponry, David's skill with a sling would later take down their champion. And it should be noted that archaeologists have found sling stones embedded in walls in the area, confirming the widespread use of the weapon, the sling, during sieges and battles in the 11th century BCE. So David's weapon of choice is therefore not a historical anomaly, but a reflection of a practical, peasant-class military skill, especially for a shepherd out alone with the sheep, protecting them from lions and bears. So, what did you think of the episode? What stood out to you? What questions were answered? What questions were raised? Where do you see things going next? What foreshadowing do you suspect has taken place? And what are you looking forward to in subsequent episodes? Looking forward to being back with you to discuss episode 3 of season 1 of House of David. Cheriste Som, everyone. Tuta.